Welcome to my algebra class. We're on chapter 12, section 3, and we're going to be using another method to solve quadratic equations, and that's the quadratic formula. And what is unique about this method is that it works no matter what. On page 567, if you can turn to that now, you can see how they obtained the formula. They took the standard form for a quadratic equation and completed the square. When they finished, they came up with this formula. X, the value for the equation, is equal to the opposite of b, which is the coefficient here of the linear term, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a, the number in front of x squared, times c, the constant, divided by 2a. So the only thing we work with here are the numbers involved in the equation, the coefficients and the constant. And there are some special conditions. The b squared minus 4ac has to be greater than or equal to 0, and a doesn't equal to 0, so we don't have division by 0 or the square root of a negative number. So here's two examples. So this is A, this is B, and this is C. So if I want to solve this and find out what values of x make this true, make it equal to 0, I have x equals the opposite of b, so that would be negative 12, plus or minus the square root of b squared, that would be 12 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 9, times c, which is negative 1, all over 2 times a, which is 9. So that's negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 144. Negative times negative is positive 36 over 18. So negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 180 over all over 18. And 180 is, let's see, we got a 9 times 20, but within the 20 is a 4, so it's 36 times 5 is what we have here. So we can take out the square root of 36, which is 6, and have the 5 left over 18. And then we can simplify, since all three of these numbers are divisible by 6. So we get negative 2 plus or minus 3 radical 5 over 3. And this will be our answer. And if they ask us to round to the nearest tenth, then we work out the two values. And that's why we have plus or minus, because there's going to be two values since it's to the second power. Second example, x squared equals negative 8. We have to set it equal to 0, so this add 8 to both sides, so x squared plus 8 equals 0. So a is 1. There is no x term, so b is 0. And c is 8. So our solution, the values for x that work, x equals the opposite of b, so that's the opposite of 0, plus or minus the square root of b squared, that'd be 0 squared, minus 4 times a, 1, times c, which is 8. Over 2 times a is 1, so over 2. So x equals plus or minus the square root of a negative 32, which is not possible because we can't take the square root of a negative number. And we could see it back here too if I just did my one method of taking the square roots. There's the negative value, and x squared can't be negative. So this one would be no solution. Okay, we're ready to do the evens, and you'll have enough practice so you'll catch on to the formula. So we're on page 570, and we're doing 1 to 14. Actually, it's 569. Problem number 2, the directions say use the quadratic formula to solve each equation. Give your irrational roots in the simplest radical form and then approximate them to the nearest tenth. You will need your calculator. So we'll pull that calculator up. So problem number 2, we have 2s squared minus 3s minus 2 equals 0. So it's set equal to 0. We're ready to go. This is A, this is B, and this is C. You don't have to write those down, but I'm doing it so you're aware of what we're doing. So the equation is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. I want you to write this down until you learn the equation. So the opposite of b, the opposite of negative 3 is 3, plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 3 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 2, all over 2a, 2 times 2. So that equals 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared is 9, and negative times a negative is plus. 4 times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16 over 4, 2 times 2. So that's 3 plus or minus the square root of 25 over 4, which equals 3 plus or minus square root of 25 is 5 over 4. So our two answers are 3 plus 5 over 4, which is 8 over 4, which is 2, and 3 minus 5 over 4, so that's negative 2 over 4, which is negative 1/2. So our solutions are 2 and negative 1/2. Problem number 4. We have 2y squared minus 6y minus 8 equals 0. So it's equal to 0. And this is A, and this is B, and this is C. And the quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Substituting in the opposite of b, b is negative 6, so the opposite of that is 6, plus or minus b squared, negative 6 squared is 36, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 8, over 2a, 2 times 2. So now we have 6 plus or minus the square root of 36. That's going to be positive. 4 times 2 is 8, times 8 is 64 over 4. So that's 6 plus or minus the square root of 100 over 4. So that's 6 plus 10 over 4 and 6 minus 10 over 4. 6 plus 10 is 16, divided by 4 is 4. And 6 minus 10 is negative 4 over 4, which is negative 1. So there's our solution, 4 and negative 1. If I put those back in, I'll get 0. Problem number 6, m squared plus 8m plus 7. Make sure they're in decreasing order so you can get the right values for A, B, and C. Our formula is x will equal the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So a is 1, b is 8, and c is 7. So the opposite of b would be negative 8 plus or minus the square root of b squared, 8 squared is 64, minus 4 times a is 1 times c is 7, over 2 times a, 2 times 1. So that's negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 minus 28 over 2. So that's negative 8 plus or minus the square root of, subtract 64 minus 28, and we get 36 over 2, which equals negative 8 plus 6 over 2, and negative 8 minus 6 over 2. Negative 8 plus 6 is negative 2 over 2, which is negative 1. And negative 8 minus 6 is negative 14 over 2, which is equal to negative 7. So our answers are negative 1 and negative 7. Problem number 8. We have k squared minus 3k minus 1. It's in decreasing order, set equal to 0. A is 1, B is negative 3, and C is negative 1. The formula, x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So the opposite of b is negative 3, the opposite of that is 3, plus or minus the square root. Negative 3 squared is 9, minus 4 times a is 1, times c is negative 1, over 2 times a, 2 times 1 is 2. So we get 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 plus negative times negative plus 4 over 2. So that's going to be 3 plus the square root of 13 over 2, and 3 minus the square root of 13 over 2. And then we have to approximate to the nearest 10 since they did not come out whole numbers. So parentheses, clear, parentheses 3 plus the square root of 13, parentheses divided by 2. To the nearest tenth, that's 3.3. And clear, parentheses 3 minus the square root of 13, parentheses divided by 2. To the nearest tenth, that's 0.3. Should be negative 0.3. Okay, problem number 10. We have n squared minus 6n minus 1 equals 0. A is 1, B is negative 6, and C is negative 1. Formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. The opposite of b, the opposite of negative 6 is 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 6 squared is 36, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 1, over 2 times a, 2 times 1 is 2. So we have 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 plus 4, which is 40, over 2. And 40 is 4 times 10, so we can take out the square root of 4. So we get 6 plus or minus 2 radical 10 over 2. So our two answers are 6 plus 2 radical 10 over 2. Wait a second, we'll simplify that a little bit more. We can divide the 6 and the 2 by 2. So that equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 10. So one answer is 3 plus the square root of 10, and the other one is 3 minus the square root of 10. And to the nearest 10th, 3 plus the square root of 10 is 6.1, but it needs to go to 6.2 since there's a 6 there, so it'd be 6.2. And 3 minus the square root of 10 is negative. Mine is just not coming out negative. Negative 0.2. The 6 will bring that up to 2. Negative 0.2. And that was problem 10, number 12. We have negative 2z squared plus 8z plus 5 equals 0. So a is negative 2, b is 8, and c is 5. Formula, x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So the opposite of b would be negative 8 plus or minus the square root of b squared. 8 squared is 64. Minus 4 times a, which is negative 2, times c, which is 5. Over 2 times a, 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. So that equals negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 64, and that's negative times negative, so plus 40, all over negative 4. So that's negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 104. Over negative 4, and 104, let's see, is 4 go in there? $26, so that's 4 times 26. So we can take out the square root of 4, which is plus or minus 2 radical 26 over negative 4. Okay, we don't want the negative sign down here, so we're dividing the top by a negative value, so that's going to be, we're just going to get that sign out of there. So these two become positive, and 4 goes, we can divide everything by 2. So this is going to be 4 plus or minus the square root of 26 over 2. Because the negative divided by negative is positive. So our answers are 4 plus the square root of 26 over 2, and 4 minus the square root of 26 over 2. So we take 4 plus the square root of 26. I didn't use the parentheses, I want to use them. Parentheses 4 plus the square root of 26, parentheses divided by 2, and I get to the nearest 10th 4.5. Now this is going to come out negative. My calculator is just not doing that because that the square root of 26 is 5 point something, so it's going to be negative. So parentheses, clear, parentheses 4 minus the square root of 26, parentheses, there it's negative, divided by 2, and it's negative 0.5. So those are my answers. And the last problem, number 14. We have j squared minus 6j equals 13. Remember, it has to be set equal to 0. So j squared minus 6j, bring the 13 over by subtracting it, equals 0. So a is 1, b is negative 6, and c is negative 13. x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. The opposite of b is negative 6, so that'd be 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 6 squared is 36, minus 4 times a is 1, times c, which is negative 13, all over 2 times a, and a was 1, so it'd be 2. So that's negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36. Negative times negative is positive, and 4 times 13 is 52 over 2. So that's negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 88 over 2. And there's a 4 times 22, so we can take out the square root of 4. So negative 6 plus or minus 2 radical 22 over 2. We can simplify that, divide everything by 2. We get negative 3 plus or minus 2 divided by 2 goes to 1, the square root of 22. So our first number is 3 plus the square root of 22. And the second one is negative 3 minus the square root of 22. So negative 3 plus the square root of 22 gives us 1.7. Okay, I made a mistake back here. This should be positive 6 all the way through here. So that's, okay, now we're ready. So clearing this out, that's 3 plus the square root of 22, which is 7.7. to the nearest tenth, and clear it, 3 minus the square root of 22 is negative 1.69, which comes out negative 1.7 to the nearest tenth. So those are our answers. That concludes the evens. Be sure and check the answers in the back for the odds.